All right, good morning, guys and girls. Today we are going to, I'm going to go over your Unit 1 test review. That way you can double check your answers and make sure you're studying the right thing. So the first set is just what is the definition of each and give an example or two. Okay, so an integer we learned is any positive or negative whole number. So I like to think of them like the counting numbers. Like you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So those would be positive whole numbers or negative numbers. And yes, 0 is included. So examples would be negative 12, 7, negative 1, 0. So any counting number and its opposite, so positive and negative. Absolute value, and this is one that lots of people are, they get these two mixed up. Remember, absolute value is a distance. Absolute value is the distance. A number is, you can say from 0 or from another number. So we'll say a distance, a number is from a point. So absolute value is a distance, and it looks like this. So like the absolute value of 3 is, or the absolute value of negative 3 is 3. The absolute value of 2 is still 2 because it's always positive. Okay, always positive. Absolute value is always positive. Additive inverse, and I wrote positive over here. Additive inverse means adding the opposite. Additive inverse is adding the inverse, which is opposite. So like if you had negative 5 plus 5, those are additive inverses because they equal 0. So you're adding the opposite value. Next it says, write an equation to model this situation. A football team lost 7 yards, so losing 7 yards looks like a negative 7 on the first play. Then they gained 9 yards on the second play. So gaining 9 yards is like adding 9. So I would say first we lost 7 yards and then we gained 9 yards. Write a real life situation about money temperature using the equation 25 plus negative 25 equals 0. And again, you guys could come up with your own. I'll just show you an example. I got $25 for my birthday because the first example has to be a positive 25. Then I went shopping and spent $25 because spending $25 is like subtracting it. Now I have no money. All right, the next, model the problem and find the sum. So negative 4 plus 6. So you always start at 0, and I'm going to go over to negative 4. And now I'm going plus 6. So now I need to go in the opposite direction, 6. So there's 4, 5, 6. This is where I landed. So negative 4 plus 6 is positive 2. Next, I have a negative 5 plus a negative 3. So I start at 0 and I go over to negative 5. And I'm going to add another negative 3. 1, 2, 3. And I end up right here. So a negative 5 and a negative 3 gives me a negative 8. This bottom section, I know it didn't show up super good on, I don't know why it scanned funny. So I'm just going to go over it with you. It says, write an equation for the addition problem modeled below. So we started at 0 and we went over to negative 5. So this line represents negative 5. So that's where I started. And now I'm going over. So, and it says write an addition problem. So I'm going to add. And it looks like I went over. So there's 5, 6, 7, 8. So I added 8 to that. So this one was worth 8. And now I went from negative 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But I went backwards. I went to the left, so that's adding a negative 5. And that shows that I ended at negative 2. All right, flipping it over, finding the sum and including the plan. And the plan seemed to be something that kids struggled with. So remember, if I look at this, my plan is, am I actually going to add or subtract? Well, I have a negative 11 and a positive 18. If I have one of each, I can't put them together. I have to subtract them. Now, 18 is bigger and it's positive, so that tells me my answer is going to be positive. So 18 minus 11 gives me 7. Okay, I have a negative 18 and a negative 12, so they're both negative. I can put them together. So I'm going to add them, but because they're both negative, I'm going to reattach my negative sign. So same signs, add and keep, different signs, subtract. So 18 plus 12 gives me negative 30. Because they were both negative, I kept my negative sign. I have a positive 15 and a negative 5. They are not the same. I have to subtract. 15's bigger and it's positive, so my answer will be positive. So different signs, subtract. So 15 minus 5 gives me 10. Okay. You hike 50 feet below the surface of the earth. So that's like a negative 50. And it's really important that you're doing this word problem breakdown. It really does make it a lot easier. So we're 50 feet below the surface of the earth into an underground cave. We see a huge bat. We become frightened and run 30 feet upward toward the entrance. So it's just 30. Before you stumble and fall. My question, where are you located in relation to the earth, so like the earth's surface, when you fall? Okay, so I started at negative 50, and I went, so and tells me I'm going to add, I went up 30 feet. So different signs, I have a negative and a positive, so different signs subtract. So 50 minus 30 is 20. But it's a negative. So negative 20. But my question says, where are you located in relation to the Earth's surface? So technically you would say 20 feet below Earth's surface. And when you say it 20 feet below Earth's surface, we know that means negative 20. All right, next it's finding the difference. So remember, when you're finding the difference, this is where you're doing that add up. And I'm going to show you another way to look at it too if you're still having a hard time. So I have a negative 6 minus 11. So negative 6 tells me I'm going to go to the left. Minus 11, I know how to subtract a number. I know how to subtract a number. So if I went negative 6 and I have to minus 11 more, I'm going to keep going negative. So I know that my answer is going to stay negative. But I also know that subtracting is the same as adding the opposite. So subtracting is the same as if I were to add the opposite value. Now they're both negative, so my answer is going to be negative. And they're both negative, so I can actually add them together. And negative 6 and negative 11 gives me a negative 17. Okay, over here, I went over 3. I know how to subtract 11, but I don't know how to subtract a negative 11. So one thing that I like to do is when it looks like this is take away negative. So if we're going to take away the negative, we're going to make it positive, right? So take away the negative and make it positive. So now we just have 3 plus 11. So they're both positive numbers. I'm going to add, and my answer is going to be positive. And 3 plus 11 is 14. Again, negative 1 goes to the left. I know how to subtract, but I don't know how to subtract a negative. So this is where you can use that, take away the negative. And when you take away the negative, they become positive. So I have one of each I have to subtract. 4 is bigger and it's positive, so my answer will be positive. And 4 minus 1 is 3. All right, find the distance between. Remember, distance is absolute value. It's always positive. So I have a point at -3 and I have a point at 23. And it even says by calculating the absolute value. So if I do absolute value of -3 and distance between and difference tells us we're going to subtract. Okay, so make sure you know these are absolute value bars and not ones. So now I have subtraction, and subtraction is the same as adding the opposite, or I went over to -3 and I have to subtract another 23. So we know it's going to be a big negative. So that tells me I'm adding 2 negatives. And a -3 and a -23 gives me a -26. But because absolute value is always positive, they are 26 spaces apart. Because remember, distance has to be positive. You cannot go a negative distance. All right, the temperature rose from 5 below 0, so that was like a -5, to 10 degrees above 0. Find the change in temperature by using the formula that shows the distance between 2 points, their absolute value of the difference. Okay, so if I started at -5, I want the difference to go up to 10. So again, we went -5 and I'm subtracting 10 more. Subtracting is the same as adding the opposite. A -5 and a -10 gives me a -15. But we know that absolute value always has to be positive, so the absolute value of -15 is 15. So what is the change in temperature? There is a 15-degree change. 15-degree change. If at any point you need to stop this and rewind it and rewatch it, that would be fantastic and a really good way to study for your test. 17 and 18 is from that property lesson that we did, and this one always tends to be a tricky one. So what we do is we look at these first 2 lines, okay? And you remember in my video I covered stuff up. So what you're saying is what changed from line 1 to line 2? So if I'm looking, I notice that these numbers are not in the same order, right? They changed. So I know that the commutative property tells me I can change the order. So it's what changed from this line to this line. Now I'm going to look and say, okay, what changed from here to here? Well, they're in the same order. However, I do notice that this one has some brackets or parentheses. So it's grouping numbers together. And the associative property tells me that I can group different numbers together. Now, what changed from this line to this line? I noticed that I had a +3 and a -3. We learned, we put on the very top of this, that anytime you add a number and its opposite, you're going to get 0. And that is called additive inverse. When you add its opposite, additive inverse. Now going from 0, whenever you add 0, that's additive identity, because that 7 didn't change its identity, it stayed the same. And I purposely filled this one in for you so that you wouldn't get these two confused, hopefully. All right, let's look at the other one. So I filled this one in because everything is in the same order. Nothing is grouped differently. What I noticed is that they applied the rules for subtraction. And